Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Getting Learning Content Right, Smart Partnerships. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's get started with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, who is the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Sabrina Moore, who is the Director of Learning and Development at Lumious. I would like to extend a thank you to Lumious for sponsoring today's webinar. Lumious is a boutique learning and development agency that creates customized solutions for large enterprises, as well as pre-packaged technical and professional development training. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. You can visit certification.brandonhall.com for more information. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics on this list that you'd like to take a survey for, it's greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com and click on Open Surveys for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last but certainly not least, a few logistics. To ask questions today, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is also being recorded, and we will share a link to that recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. The chat is open for today, so we invite you to please join in today's discussion, share your thoughts as we go throughout, or just simply pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining in from today. And if you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. And without any further delay, I'll turn things over to Dave so we can dive right in.
Great. Thanks, Melissa, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Sabrina and I are looking forward to talking through some of these issues around content, and we're finding a partner to help with the content issues that a lot of organizations are facing. And so to sort of get us into that, what I wanted to do was start off with some of our research here at Brandon Hall Group and see what we've been seeing from organizations about the things that they're facing and how they're addressing them. And then, we're going to talk through how we start to approach our learning content and finding a partner that's going to actually help you ultimately meet your goals. But, when we start talking about this, and when Sabrina and I first began talking about this a few weeks ago, before we were putting this webinar together, I think of it from my perspective about why organizations are looking for solutions in this area is one thing that we know is that L&D teams are just completely stretched to the limit. And I don't think that's surprising to anybody that's on the line today. And it's not as though it's necessarily a new situation. I think most, if I look back in the history of doing this kind of research, I think most L&D teams have always felt some sort of pressure around a need for more resources to do the work that they're trying to do. But it's become a much more acute issue now in, say, the wake of the pandemic, where there's challenges around having the right talent in place. There's challenges around budgets. There's challenges around changing how we do things because the way the organization operates has changed. And so in one of our recent studies, we asked companies, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing as you look forward to developing skills for the future? And the number one thing that they said was that we just don't feel like we've got the people, the time, or the money to support what we're trying to do. You can see here 21% plus 26%, so you're looking around 47% gave it a 4 or 5 on a 5-point scale of how big of a challenge is this for your organization. And so that put this at the top of the list. And like I said, it's not as though you could go back in time and ask any learning leader if they wanted more money or more time, and they would have turned you down. But it's just become a much more critical issue because the organization is asking a lot more of the learning function, ability to deliver a wider array of skills, more in-depth, complex skills, to do it to a much more dynamic workforce. And so it requires a lot of doing. So on the one hand, I look at this idea of, we need more money and more people to do it. It's a bit of of a cop out on the part of the L&D team, simply because that's always been the case. But there is some truth to it in this current environment that the resources are undoubtedly stretched, and the needs that are trying to be met are much greater than they have. And so it's really put a lot of pressure on L&D teams. And one of the other elements in that same question about, what is leading to your inability to develop the skills that you're going to need in the future, again, is this idea that, well, we don't have the content that we need to do this. Only 8% said this is not a challenge at all. I mean, for the most part, it's somewhat of a moderate challenge, but still a challenge nonetheless. And, like I said, at least 92% of organizations say we're dealing with this to some degree or another. So the idea that we need to do these things, and the content that we have available to us right now is not going to get it done for us. And then another element of that is their inability to find what they need out there in the marketplace. Like we've decided we need to build these skills. We want to go in this direction. We can't find what we need. It doesn't exist. Again, now we're talking about 84% of organizations to some degree or another say that this content, we just can't find what we need. So that brings us to the conversation that we're having today, right? Is like, how do we find a partner that's going to help us solve this challenge, to get us the content that we need that doesn't exist, help us make it, so that we can try to address these future skills issues. And to sort of add to what's going on, the current state, the picture that organizations are facing, one of the things we asked is, well, what format, or what source does your content take? And this is, a list of items, and companies could pick anything from the list, select all that apply. And I think you probably aren't too surprised to see, although I was a little surprised, not that it was at the top of the list, but how high up it is, that 79% of organizations picked like a PowerPoint or presentation creation tool is where most of their content comes from, or a lot of their content comes from. So there's, that sort of state of, if we want to sort of take learning to this next level and move to do all these new things, but we're really focused on doing it in a pretty old school traditional way. That's again what's sort of standing in people's way. But you can also counter that with the idea that there's a lot of other sources at play, right? Companies are looking for good or bad or indifferent. 55%. The next thing is just the internet in general, just going out and finding things and trying to make sure they're available. And then you can see that they're purchasing off the shelf content, right? Stuff that exists. That's 50% of companies. But we did see earlier that one of the challenges is that what we want is not necessarily available. We do see 41% say they're purchasing content from a custom partner, and so that's more specifically what we're going to be talking about today. But Sabrina, I'll take this opportunity to bring you in and just say hi, and also just comment on, when you see this array of different sources that people are going to find content for their learning environment, what do you think? Does anything stand out to you? Does it make you think of anything in terms of what you see from clients?
Yeah, I think it's actually really strong. And representative of what we see as well is the blended modality, being able to pull from many different ways. We know our learners have short attention spans, shorter and shorter ones. So by mixing up the modalities and by using all these different content resources, you're really creating a stronger end result of a program, for sure.
Exactly. And so what we wanted to do before we sort of get into some of the the practical solutions to this and ways to think about it, let's get a sense of what's going on with your organization. So what sort of brought you to this? Typically, when people come to our webinars, I'd like to think it's just because you wanted to come say hi to me and see me talk. And I'm assuming you're trying to solve a problem. And so we wanted to know what the challenge was that brought you today. Is it that you currently don't have the skills that you need to get this done on your team? Do you think that there's just not enough time to get it all done? Maybe it's a combination of both of those things, or maybe it's something else altogether. And if it is something else, feel free in the chat to add in whatever that is, or any other thoughts that you might want to add around the challenges you're facing from this perspective. But the poll should be open. Feel free to vote, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. And we'll look at the results. But Amy was asking about the colors on the previous chart. They were actually, it's just visual. The delineation wasn't a color thing. It was just the actual delineation was they went down in descending order from top to bottom. So I appreciate that question. But yeah, it was just a list of descending order there. So let's see what the results of this poll were. We'll go ahead and share the results. And it looks as though the biggest, most common thing anyway, 47% of the group that participated just don't have time to do all the things that we're trying to do. And then you've got 35% would say that, plus a lack of skills on the team. So not terribly surprising that people are facing these things. These are obviously what we say in our research, what we hear and see all the time. I'm sure, obviously, when people come to you and in your group, Sabrina, these are the things that are driving them in your direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And the time thing, 100%. I think we're all swamped, we're all busy. And that's actually a really good thing, because that means when we develop these wonderful programs, it then minimizes the time that you need to maintain it, but you have the skill set on your team to do that. So it's means good things for the learning programs too. Yeah, I see, Melissa, you put in, for those that answered something else, free to share it. I'd love to know what else brought people here. It's going to be
absolutely.
No.
Right. We do want to know that.
So,
all right, great. So we're going to close that poll. And then, so Sabrina, I wanted you to sort of start off and just, you can, start walking people through this journey about how to think through this and some of the challenges that people either on the call may have already faced, or things that they should be prepared for to think through as you start to think about finding a partner to help you with this content challenge.
absolutely. But before I get started, elephant in the room is that, yes, Lumious is a custom learning solutions development agency. And I've been to these webinars where you realize 5 minutes in that you accidentally signed up for a sales pitch and you didn't mean to. And this is not that. So my favorite events to attend are where I walk away with specific actions I can take. So that is my commitment to you as we move forward. Here. So off the elephant goes, right? So let's talk smart partnerships. I see two of your largest contenders for custom content: a staff augmentation and a development agency, or your more kind of turnkey solution. So there's a bunch of alternative flavors, but I landed here for the sake of brevity. Staff augmentation is a great option when you know the resources that you need and you have the capacity to manage those resources or augment them as you need to. So an example would be, I need an instructional designer and I have a project manager and a process for quality control already taken care of. Then we have our development agency. So a development agency is going to be your top contender when you need a team to come in and cohesively get the job done. Maybe you need it done fast, or it's a specialized skill set, or you don't have the capacity for extra support. So an example of that might be your leadership program. You can manage lifecycle maintenance once the program's built, but you need someone to come in and do the analysis and the strategy alignment, the focus groups, the multimodality development, the strategy for the rollout, all the things that take up all that time that you said earlier that you guys don't have. So that would indicate more of a development agency type need. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about the best ways to really partner with a development agency and figure out who that partner should be and get you the most bang for your buck as you move forward. So before we get rocking and rolling on that, have you guys worked with a content partner before? And David, I think you had some metrics around that too.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, some of the challenges that people say that they're facing. And so when we looked at sort of the state of learning practices, one of the things that we found is we asked about, how are you acquiring your content? We saw earlier sort of the modalities for sourcing and that kind of thing. But we found that when companies look at the learning content for their leaders and their managers, about 30% of it is being created by an external partner. And then when you look at sort of the overall individual contributors, it's about 23% of all content is being created by these external partners. Again, this is not, purchasing it off the shelf, which is part of that mix. This is specific that 30% of the content for managers is custom created by partners, and 23% of that individual contributor group, their content is being created. So you can see, again, it takes a pretty big chunk of the overall content ecosystem. And then, of course, you get into certain things where specific industries or organizations have more specialized needs, then those percentages obviously go up because there's even less available to them off the shelf.
Awesome. Those of you that answered yes, I'm about to ask you to type something, so get near your keyboard if you're not there already. So I'd be intrigued, for those of you that said yes, to see if this aligns with your experience. When you look at a content development agency or your content partner, they're typically bringing this bucket load of people to the table, whether you see them or not. So they're going to have instructional designers and subject matter experts and graphic designers and quality control and professional narration and video designers and developers and project managers and all the things that they have. They're going to bring people who can really specialize in and shine in their area of expertise. And I don't think I'm seeing your slide move to the next one.
Okay, here it comes. Sorry about that.
No worries. Here are all the people I just said. So for example, I have an instructional designer who nails the analysis. She is so skilled at interviewing SMEs and synthesizing information to action and creating program plans and fantastic learner experiences, but her graphic design is awful. And she'll tell you that. So we grab a graphic designer to collaborate when she's building on these actual programs. So when you're looking for these kind of next level experiences, you're often talking about multiple people on a team that are stellar in their area, providing that full experience versus your more utility knife type person who, as we all know, still has a very, very, very strong role in L&D. So for those of you I said to hop over to your keyboards, here we go. I'm about to get really negative in this webinar and talk about the 1,000,001 things that could go wrong and how we stop these issues from arising. But before we get super negative, I'd love to hear from those of you who have done partnerships before. What is the best part about working with a content partner? And then also the flip side of that, what's the worst one that you've seen? So warm up your type.
You keep that in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that as we go through. And I'll start sharing some of those as we see them. With Sabrina, we got one already, a good one. So we started off on the right foot, getting new ideas on how to do things, which is great, and also bandwidth, which is obviously what everyone's sort of after. Ultimately, is we don't have the bandwidth internally to do it, so we're getting more bandwidth from the external team. So those are some of the things that are coming in already.
Oh, Melody said bad comes back and it was not the direction you thought it would be. That's actually one of our first points. You read my mind. Figure out the storyboard, or it's hard to visualize. Yeah, alignment on the process. We're going to talk a little bit about that too, and some of the things that you can ask. Let's see, partners, better skill set. So that's that skills and new ideas. It's always fun to work with new people. That's my favorite part. We actually just got back from DevLearn, and that was one of my favorite things to see is all the case studies and the things that people share about how they do and what they might do differently than the way that you do it. Scope.
And Melody also brings up scope creep, which I think we're all familiar with to one degree or another.
Every project manager's worst nightmare, right? Good. People that stronger backgrounds in areas I don't. Graphic design. Yeah. Timelines and unexplained costs. Yep. Being really clear. I see a lot of patterns around clarity and alignment. The best part is just having ready-made content that team members can access. Yep. Yeah, that's for that more of the off the shelf, but also the other too. Oh, interesting, Lisa. Bad is long timelines from the content partner. We'll have to take a look and maybe dig into that when we get to our Q&A session. Cool. So we can go ahead and start moving forward. I'm going to hit you guys with a lot of questions to ask and tasks to do, but we've consolidated them all into a semi-short checklist. There are a lot of them that you can use. So some magical fairy, I think named Melissa, is going to drop the link to that in the chat for us, but we'll also have access to it later. So there's the link. I just saw it pop up in my chat. Hopefully you will in yours as well. Okay, so one of the first challenges that I chose to talk about was they just don't get us. So I was working with a marketing vendor a while back and I ran into this. I constantly found myself having to get into the weeds of the content, the imagery they chose, the layouts, the verbiage. There was never a deliverable from them that I just went, this is so cool. And when you're working with an outside vendor, part of what they're supposed to be bringing to the table, like was said in the chat earlier, is those new ideas and the new ways to do things and some of those wow moments. So how do you make sure that you're actually in alignment and they're going to get you? So the first thing I would recommend is identifying what are their core values. So do your research, look at their website. If how they treat their people matters to you, which I hope it does, check out their employee evaluations. Really identify if they align with you and your company's core values. Look at their learning strategy. So do the programs that they show you align with your strategies? If you're looking for blended modality programs, you're probably not going to want someone whose core strength is just e-learning. So in those initial discovery meetings, when you start brainstorming with them, is it exciting? Do you have rapport? Are you eager to work with them and make these wonderful things a part of your program? Look at their design. So do they have designers? How are they going to support and execute on your brand standards? Does their work align with your expectations from a graphics perspective? And this is where you really want to dive into their specific samples, because everybody can talk a big game, right? The meat is when we actually get to look at the content. And then look at their voice. So when I talk about voice, I mean the personality of their communications. And to evaluate this, you also want to look at examples of their learning development work. And I'd strongly recommend that you go beyond their website, because their website is likely a reflection of their marketing, not necessarily their development teams. Figure out who is going to actually be working with you and stalk them on LinkedIn. How do they show up online? And is that aligned with what you're hoping for? And a quick side note on that, on all the stalking that you're doing, is great writers can adapt their tone based on need. So as you do this research, as you look at how they're showing up, take some of it with a grain of salt. And I would, again, strongly recommend that you look at some of the samples for brands that are similar to yours. My experience is that when you find alignment in these spaces, that it just gets easy. Learning development is a creative field. And it should be fun and exciting. And your content partner should feel like an extension of your team, not just someone that you're constantly having to realign with.
Yeah. And I just wanted to sort of jump on that too, is that, going back to some of the data I shared a minute ago, this is so critical that you feel as though you've got a partner and a partner understands you, right? It's more than a vendor. You can buy stuff from anybody. You're trying to work with somebody. And so you have to really take this step, this consideration upfront very, very seriously. And, we hear it when we talk to companies, one of the biggest reasons their companies are reluctant to do any outsourcing of any kind is because nobody understands us more than we do, right? We are us. We know how things operate. It's impossible to get someone else to figure that out. But a good partner, whether it's content or anything else, is going to have a mechanism, a framework in place to work with you to get to a place where they do understand what you're after and you are working together. Because again, in this case, you're not necessarily just buying off the shelf content. You're buying this partnership. You're trying to get someone to become an extension of what it is that you do.
Exactly. I love that you say extension. They're an extension of your team. They're not a separate team that's kind of siloed and working separately. Absolutely. Okay, this one's fun. Okay, have you ever been to your local chain, whatever, and you order the really yummy picture, and then that's not what you get on your plate when it comes out? Disappointing. And misalignment between expectations and reality is not a good look. So how does this misalignment show up? Disappointed stakeholders. They were promised a next level experience and instead they get 10 pages and a multiple choice quiz. Or you run into changes in scope, saw that in the chat, that weren't planned for and they impact your budget. Or maybe you love the deliverables, but they're in a tool that now you don't use and you can't maintain them. So how do we stop this from happening? First, who are you talking to in these discovery meetings? Are you chatting with a salesperson who is promising you the moon, Or are you talking to someone who's on the development team and likely grounded in reality? You should see an instructional designer, a subject matter expert, or a project manager who is going to actually work on your project in some of those final conversations. Now, you're likely going to talk to someone on the business development side first, because they'll have to figure out what project team needs to even get involved. But as you close in on a concrete project, definitely ask that someone from your planned development team is involved. Again, looking at those samples and their learning strategies. If they talk to you about level 1, 2, and 3 interactions, great baseline. But I can make a really crummy scenario that is still considered level 2 interaction. So again, look at the samples, ask to see ones that are in line with what they're scoping for you and how that's going to actually show up. And finally, know what tools you want them to develop in. Confirm that's what they're going to use, and make sure that you're going to get the source files. That way you know that you're able to maintain. Which brings us to, I can't maintain this. So you have this big, beautiful program that you're thrilled with, and a year or two later, it's out of date and quickly becomes obsolete. You want to find someone who's going to make strategic modality choices. And what I mean by that is that they should be asking questions like, how often does this content change? If it changes all the time, while an e-learning would be cool, maybe we'd recommend a VILT, a virtual instructor-led training that can be more easily updated. Or maybe we split the content up. So the part that changes all the time is in a location the product team maintains, but the core concepts are in e-learning. They should be asking you, how does your audience access the material in their flow of work? So maybe we'd love an interactive e-learning, but I can load an MP4 into the tool for just-in-time reminders. You want a partner who's going to be a good steward of your time and your money. So look for them to ask those questions and maybe even push back on the modality that you've originally proposed, because that's how a true partnership shows up. Beyond just making sure that they're using the tools that you have access to, like I mentioned before, make sure it's tools you actually use and feel comfortable with. So InDesign can make beautiful documents, but would you be more likely to maintain the document if it was built in Word or PowerPoint? Do you have many people in your team that have InDesign? Could you get the business line involved in maintaining materials if it's tools that they already have? So along those same lines, you want to look for a partner who's going to work with you in the use of expensive resources. So for example, live actors can be a really powerful resource when you're doing soft skill scenarios. But will your partner have access to that actor next year? Are they being mindful of using multiple actors and actresses? So when you do updates, it's not a stark difference in talent. Can we use someone internal instead of an external? And are they partnering up with you on what that looks like? There's a million and one examples I could share here, but find someone who is going to be thoughtful and realistic. And I would encourage you guys, I'm going to step through a few more scenarios around this. I'd love for you to share some do's and don'ts as I talk about some of these things, because I only have a certain amount of time here. I'm trying to leave time for the Q&A also. So I didn't hit everything. So would love for you guys to share that there.
Yeah, I would imagine as we look at each one of these scenarios that people who have partnered before may have run into one or more of these, and just, yeah, I'd love to get perspective on your experiences.
Yeah, I'm only one perspective. Cool. Okay. It's gonna be ready when. I saw a couple chats in there about that. So I think most of us are in the development space, or maybe you touch the development space if you're here. Delays happen, that's reality, but they shouldn't be happening because of poor planning or invalid expectation setting. Surprise delays result in disappointed, and that might be a mild term to use here. So disappointed stakeholders, it erodes their trust in your ability to deliver what and when you say you will, and it can significantly delay or erode your ROI, your return on investment, especially for strategic and timely initiatives, which honestly is most of the time what a content development partner is brought in for. So when you're meeting with your vendor, ask questions like, what is your development lifecycle? They should have a clear development path with clear expectations of you and your team. Make sure that you ask who on your team will need to be a part of development. What roles will they have? Also understand roughly the time expectation for your stakeholders in a project. So when you have to go to the business for subject matter experts, you give their leaders a good feel for what's going to be expected of them so you can make adjustments to their workload. Understand the milestones for review and know yourself and your team. If you know that you have a senior leader who you're not going to want to show things to until the end when it's beautiful and their feedback needs to be implemented, which honestly, if it's going to the senior leader, it probably does, right? Your partner needs to add that to the scope of work, or you need to work together to identify appropriate touch points and how to engage with that leader. Does the content development agency provide a project manager? And what do the communications and status reports look like? In development, there's a lot of, oh yeah, I have that document, I'm going to send it to you, and please review this by Monday. And there's a lot of cats to chase, and most of the cats have a full-time job, and learning development is this little tiny side project. So it needs to be easy and organized. How are they going to support you in that? Thanks, David, for bringing that back up. And finally, be realistic. So when your partner talks to you about timelines, ask what the expected turnaround time on requests and reviews is. If you know you have a crazy busy team who won't meet them, let them know. Create a realistic plan. If all hands emergencies tend to pop up, make sure that you're not going to be penalized for some of those delays. My biggest thing is just to have honest and upfront communications throughout the processes so that you don't have any surprises.
Yeah, we have a whole framework here for like a technology selection, which follows a very similar sort of pattern that you're describing. And one of the key elements in that we always press upon is you got to ask the right questions up front. You can't be afraid to ask pointed questions and get your potential partners to answer them from your use case perspective, right? It's very simple to go find technology providers, content providers, and they will present to you nonstop, and they will show you all their greatest stuff. But if it isn't relative to what you're trying to do, if it isn't solving your specific problems, then it really isn't very helpful. So it's really critical that you ask the right questions and hard questions. And, even when they will give you references, like, oh, you can go check these companies we've worked with. Of course, they're going to give you their star customers, which of course they would, but you can still talk to those people and get valuable information by asking them the right questions. So I think this is a really critical piece for sure.
Yeah. And today we're talking a lot about how you can make sure that you get the answers to those questions. But I would also flip it and say, they should be asking you these questions. These are the things that we do to make sure that we're aligned on scope, to make sure that we're going to meet or exceed expectations. So don't internalize the fear that, oh my gosh, if I don't get every single one of these, it's going to all blow up, because really they should be partnering up with you, if they're a good partner anyway, to help you with that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So, perfect segue here. Why didn't I ask about your partner should be bringing up everything? You want people to feel represented and safe when they take your content. And so your partner should ask you questions about diversity, inclusion, accessibility, localization, all of those different things. But you don't want to be dinged later because you didn't ask the question or you didn't bring it to the table as well. So ask questions like, how do you ensure you're aligned with our diversity and inclusion standards? You should hear things like, we want your DE&I stakeholders to review material. We've had diversity experts review our process and standards. We're going to make mindful choices of scenarios, personas, images, representation. You could ask, do you make sure that you match audio and visual personas? I attended a diversity panel it was a surprisingly hot topic, and not as standard as you might expect with development groups. So make sure that you're asking some of those questions, and make sure also that you understand your stance and your company's stance on that so that you can bring that forward to the tables to make sure that they have alignment there. Accessibility. If you don't already have published accessibility standards, your content partner should be able to lead you in the right direction based on your goals. But again, it's a conversation that you need to have to make sure that you have at the scoping table to make sure that you're not hit later. And then localization. It's another one, just have an upfront conversation about. Even if the partner is not who is going to localize your content, it might change some of their content strategy and the recommendations of what they do if they know that you're going to have to then translate this into multiple languages, or if you're going to try to modify the content in other ways.
Yeah, and I think these 2 points, or well, actually all 3 points, they get very specific as you go down, are critical too, because we do a lot of work here around looking at the personalization of learning. As organizations move forward, they're trying to rethink the way, they're trying to rethink the entire learning experience and making it more personalized, contextualized for the learner so that they're more engaged, they're more connected to the learning, why they're doing it, what the outcomes are. And one of these, there's a couple of the elements that get overlooked in terms of personalization are these ideas of accessibility and localization. There's a big element of that. If you have learners who feel as though their needs aren't being met because of an accessibility issue or a language issue, you have suddenly, not only is it just a hurdle, but you sort of shut them out from the learning experience. Now they have a negative association with any of this learning going forward, and they're now not feeling as though they're engaged or part of the process. So it can be something that can be readily addressed, but is often not thought about in the larger context of the personalization of learning. So again, really important to, when you're dealing with partners, to know what their approach is and how they solve for these things.
Totally agree. And a lot of times it's this afterthought of, oh yeah, when really it should be a part of that initial analysis of what are we going to do here so that we can make smart content choices and smart strategies. Learning is hard, and it's a lot of brain power, and it takes a lot of work. And if you add also language on top of that, or I can't, click the button, or I don't even know what's on the screen right now because it doesn't have a describer, just adds to the challenge. We'll make it as easy as possible.
Absolutely.
Cool. Would love for you guys to weigh in on this too, if there are certain things that you have seen work really well or don't work really well. Accessibility decisions made too late can have a big impact on projects. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Tara, that's totally right. And it supports what you were just saying, Sabrina. And there are so many of these things that often, as you said, get looked at as an afterthought. Like, let's do the thing, let's build the thing, and then we can add personalization, localization, context. We can add accessibility later, right? Like there's some sort of sprinkle that you put on the cake, and that's just not how it works. They have to be core ingredients to it. It has to start at the beginning before anything's actually created. As part of the strategy of this project is we need to include this, 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 and this, and we're trying to reach these audiences, and it has to be baked in, or otherwise it won't work. It won't have the effect that you want, or it's going to cause all of these other problems.
Yes. And make sure that you are involving those stakeholders in some of those conversations as well, because actually recently we have those accessibility conversations up front. We're halfway through the development. This hidden stakeholder behind the curtain suddenly pops out and they go, we need to be 508 compliant. That's a big difference. And that changes quite a lot of work. And so we had to kind of talk them through what the impact would be. And they ended up determining something different, a different direction to go in, because they didn't really have to be compliant. Someone thought it would be cool as an idea, and they hadn't thought through all of the impacts of that. Melody said it can be an issue when the client does not have a relationship with their LMS administrator or even know how suitable the project will be for their available platforms and formats. Oh yeah. Yes, technology is a fun one. I could do a whole nother webinar unpacking good use of technology and knowing your technology leading to great learner experiences.
Yeah, and you brought up 508, and Tara backed that up with, you're working with a partner who doesn't really understand what 508C compliance even is. And that's important because there are various levels of 508 compliance, and it depends on which one you're aiming for, so having a basic understanding of what those are, in the WCAG, of course, you have the accessibility guidelines for web access, really important guidelines to be aware of if you have anything to do with content at all. And you can get very deep into the weeds on this stuff and get right down it, or what's probably more important is just to have a basic understanding of what the levels are and what they mean, and work with partners that have that deeper understanding of the ins and outs of all the different guidelines.
Yeah. And what is our audience makeup? So, it's not about compliance, right? It's about the people that's who we want to be, working with. And so what does that look like as a makeup for your organization, and how do we best support them? And are there other ways to support them that won't impact, the larger strategy? Or there's a lot of options. Cool. I love the engagement, guys. This is my favorite way. It's just to make it a conversation. So keep it going. Okay. So, oh crap, we weren't prepared. So we talked a lot about what you need to ask your content partner to find alignment and to avoid some of these pitfalls that we're talking about. But there is definitely some homework that you can do before the project gets started and during, to make sure that you don't become the bottleneck and create churn around project start dates and review cycles or misaligned stakeholders. So first, check your content and your system access requirements. Melody, you were talking about that a second ago. You may or may not have to have had to get people outside of your company access before. And it can be a surprisingly large amount of time depending on what the needs are and what your organization's security looks like and what your tech has on their plate. You also might need to get creative or adjust scope if you can or can't get access to certain systems, for example. So we had a project in which we were doing a systems training, but we couldn't get access to the system. And so then we have to work with our customer on getting the screenshots, and they have to be, a specific size and all of the things that go around that. Let's see, Melody said, sometimes the client in-house is not prepared for a series of review processes and somehow thought they were handing it off and in 6 weeks get back a polished piece. That is exactly what they wanted. Surprised they still have to have bandwidth for reviews. The project will take longer. That is so true, Melody. Yes. And if you want it informed and aligned, then you have to have those review cycles, and you have to make sure that it's the right content and all of those things. Yes.
Yeah. And I'll speak from experience. We put out a lot of content here at Granite Hall Group. I think if anybody's familiar with us and our papers and frameworks and all these things that we produce, and we work with a lot of different outside providers in providing content, and the review process is critical. And the challenge becomes, if you're working with multiple partners, as like we do, it's a different review process for each, right? They have different cadences, different needs, and then making sure you understand what that review process should be, and that whatever you did for one project may not be the same for the other, just depending on the stakeholders and how many times things need to get looked at. So that all has to be ironed out and laid out for everybody so they know.
So true. Yes. Yes, I'll just say yes. Tara, let's see, you said, are there sandboxes available, especially for simulation? Yeah, so if I understand what you're saying is ask the customer that, or ask the stakeholders of the business line, because that will impact, what does our training need to look like for this tool? Can I go play? Ask the question. Yes. Yeah. Can our learners go play in a sandbox, or do we have to create a sandbox, or do we have to create the simulated experience for them to play? Yeah, that's a really good point. Cool. Okay, I love the engagement. Back to what can I do to prepare? So from a development perspective, think about file management and structure. So your content partner will probably have a file sharing system that they use. We use Dropbox, but where possible, I'd encourage you to have a safe place under your control where they're loading materials. So make sure that old things get archived and that all your source is in its logical place. And I mean logical place, that when you look at it in 2 years and you can't remember anything about the project, that you can fumble your way into the right spot. I can't tell you how many times I've gone, good work, past me. And I'd be lying if I said that there weren't also some times when I was ready to kick myself because it was in a folder that I thought was obvious at the time, but was not. Speaking of file structure, who on your side is going to be double checking that the files are there, that you have them? Also, if you can't get your partner access to your calendars, who on your end is going to have those like Tetris type style scheduling conversations? Make sure you have a logistics lead. So it might not need to be a full-blown PM depending on your partner support, but someone needs to be willing to step up on some of those things. Who's your content decision maker for when your SMEs don't agree? Not that that would ever happen, right? And for all your stakeholders and SMEs, make sure that you are communicating a clear vision for the program. Think about, why are we doing this? Who are we training? Who is out of scope for this training? What are we trying to achieve? Make sure that you align your internal stakeholders around expectations about roles and responsibilities. I can't tell you how many times we've kind of walked in and everybody thinks something different is happening, and we kind of do that realignment there. But the better prepared we can be from the start, the more we can make sure that we have the right people in the room from the beginning, which greatly impacts all of the things that we have talked about. Melody said Doodle. Yeah, Doodle's a fun one for scheduling. That's a blast from the past. I haven't used that since college. Holy moly. Any other recommendations people have?
Yeah, I haven't seen any others than that, but
No worries. Okay, as we talk about SMEs and reviewers, a key thing to watch out for as you choose who is on the team is potential for review fatigue, especially if it's a larger initiative. So I find a lot of times those great SMEs end up being asked to participate in a lot of development, which can lead to overwhelm and review fatigue when they're just reviewing so many things that they're mentally exhausted and they start missing items because they just have too much on their plate. Or they don't remember kind of decisions, and so they're reworking their own work because they've forgotten what was there. So be mindful of collisions in development cycles and how they impact your SMEs across multiple initiatives. And that's where you really want to talk to their leadership too.
yeah, 100%.
Cool. Okay. So I probably set the stage for you that everything's going to fall apart and the world is going to end and it's going to be a horrible experience. But with the right preparation and alignment, working with a content partner can be a magical thing. And I know I'm a little bit biased here, but I'll flip it and say I absolutely love getting to collaborate with people. And when those collaborations and the development goes right, it goes so right. You're going to design and develop programs that go beyond what you can even imagine. Together, meeting minds, getting all those people, we can do just absolutely amazing things.
Yeah. And I think one of the takeaways from all the things you're describing is it's the idea of going into this with a sort of long-term mindset, right? I think a lot of organizations look at something like this, specifically, a custom content engagement as a one-time thing, right? Like we just need help just now for this. But if you think about it as a long-term where you can build a partnership with somebody when they are available for you when you need them, and they already understand you go through this whole process that we've described. Now, the next project that you have, all of these things that Sabrina just walked us through, if you've met these challenges, they diminish immensely, right? Because you've sort of walked through all of those issues. And now the challenges you face are specific to a given project and, what's going on in that particular program that you're building. I think that it's a mistake to think of, because look, we talked about finding a partner, an organization that understands you. And, that's one of the biggest things I mentioned, the reluctance of L&D teams to look externally to alleviate some of that reluctance and the things that push you back is to come at it from this perspective of, let's build a partnership, a long-term relationship where even if it is just for this one project now, as we, need to do things, we can engage these people again, and we're already up to speed. So it's really important to think about, a lot of times we work through so many different technology selections with organizations, and there's so much of they start with these big picture perspective, right? We want to do this long-term thing, but as they get into the actual selection process, the head starts to tilt down. And pretty soon we're all just, everyone's looking about 2 or 3 feet in front of them. Like, I just want to get this particular thing that's happening right now. I want to fix that. And then all the focus goes on that. And then that thing gets fixed, but nothing else down the road is. So it's really important in these engagements to not get stuck in, I'm just trying to solve this particular problem. I'm just trying to put out this particular fire. I'm trying to partner with a fire department that's going to help me whenever a fire comes up. It's just really about a mindset change. As again, it's not just walking in and buying something once. It's about engaging with a partner for sure.
I love how you say the fire department, because it really does, especially as I think back on everybody's response where time is a big, big factor. You don't have time when you're in the middle of a fire to install your fire hydrant and do all of that. So the more, that you have those established partnerships with things that, are a little bit more straightforward, the easier it is in the long run, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it came up in the chat too. I think the other big key is that access to skills that maybe not aren't available on your team. There's no shame in that. I think a lot of organizations face challenges around the talent that's available, not just in L&D, across the whole organization. There are these talent challenges, especially right now, the companies are trying to fix. And we do our research, we ask L&D teams, and there are definitely skills that L&D teams wish they had, that they want to either build or hire for in the future, but it's just not available to them at the moment. And so knowing that there are resources where not only those skills exist, but like they exist at sort of the highest level, right? Where you've got, this is what these people are dedicated to doing. It makes sense to sort of tap into that when you have the need and when you have the opportunity, for sure.
Yeah. And then you can learn from them, right? So it's not just about, I don't have this skill. It's, I now have this deliverable that has this wonderful video production. I'm going to climb in the back end and figure out how they did that. And then you can make it repeatable in your organization. We've had some groups where we've done, large scale multimodality programs. And now it's almost like they have this templatized, version that they can do for some smaller initiatives while we go and tackle the next big initiative for them. So there's definitely ways. It's not just about the deliverable. It's also about, now I like an outline template that I like. We might use something kind of similar to that, or
probably the most popular resource that we have at Brennan Hall Group is our case study library, which it's just volumes and volumes and volumes of organizations that have done a specific thing really well. And it's laid out. And that's what people always come to us. They want to know the research. They want to know, what's going on, the trends. But at the end of it, they want to know, okay, is there an example that I can look at of how this is done? And now in this kind of relationship, that's what your partner is providing with you, is this insight as to here's how it's done. So yeah, as Sabrina said, you can start to incorporate these new ideas that, let's face it, we only have the universe in which we operate as a reference. If we can expand that to, oh, we didn't think of it that way, or it looks like this thing that we didn't think would works really well. You can start to bring those things into your overall strategy and how you approach things in the future. So again, that's another great resource. Like you said, it isn't just that product that's handed over at the end. It's all of the stuff that comes with it, for sure.
Yeah. And working in different industries. Yeah. Please ask questions, guys. I'd love to make this conversation targeted. But another thing is, because we work across different industries, some things are best practice standards in one industry and the other industry has no idea about it. So we think we're just bringing the standard, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, mind blown, and able to really adopt that too.
Yeah, I would just, we do have a few minutes left, so I would encourage those of you who have any questions to please go ahead and ask, or even just any comments that you might have, throw those in the chat. You can use the question box, keeping an eye on both. I think we've done a pretty good job, Sabrina, of answering people's questions, as we go through. I'm going to ask you sort of a pointed question, and I think it might be interesting to folks, because, we're talking about a partnership, right? And so have you, it doesn't have to be specifics, but in your mind, working with clients, have you ever had to fire a client? It's one thing for a client to say, we don't want to work with this provider anymore for one reason or another, but do you think that that's something that goes both ways?
I definitely do think that goes both ways. In a protecting your people kind of way. Yeah. We have been really, really lucky in that, because of that kind of brand alignment, we align with a lot of people and we work with a lot of people who have really strong values and treat people right. So have I had to fire a client? Maybe a really long time ago, but it was with app development, not learning development. Yeah. I found learning people, we just tend to be, as an industry, better emotional, intelligence, better able to communicate, because we are learning all of these things and communicating out the best. So
yeah. But I think it's something that, it's part of that relationship, and it actually ends up in the long run being best for everyone, because I think it's the idea that a provider can recognize that you're not going to get, as a client, you're not going to get what you want from this, right? And then no one's happy. At least we can, solve this quickly, and move on. And then it's a learning experience for everybody. But I think it's just something, as you're going down this road, to keep in mind that it's one thing to do all the things that we've been talking about, as far as asking all the right questions and doing this due diligence. But there's also this element of being reasonable and understanding reality, so that, you're not surprised by feedback that you might get by people who know what they're doing. It's important to keep an open mind when going into these kind of relationships.
Goes to having those upfront conversations where you're not engaging with somebody. Like, we've probably had clients that we don't even start working with because we're very upfront with, some of our standards and that type.
Yep. So a good question that did come in was around going back to 508. Do you have any ideas around best tools or apps to ensure a 508 accessibility?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I am by no means an expert. I don't want to talk out of turn on that. I can say that a lot of your rapid authoring tools will have some sort of a way to check on that built into it. Now, you kind of have to do it with a grain of salt. For example, I'll use Storyline for an example. If you run Storyline through, something that checks for compliance, especially to readers, you're going to get a bunch of flags. Some of those flags are not real flags. They're kind of distractions because of the way that e-learning is built. So it depends. I would say be mindful of your tools and apps. I can maybe do some homework with my team who's better educated on accessibility specifically, and we can get some of that in an external communication.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think you'll get that from most tools, like even like an Acrobat reader or an Adobe PDF format. It'll flag and say, you may have accessibility issues with this. Or even if you're writing an email in Outlook, your Outlook might say, hey, this might have an accessibility issue. Those are helpful. I would just I think they're more about guidelines. I think if you were coming from a perspective of having a knowledge of these guidelines and then partnering with somebody who fully understands them, I think that is your best insurance for accessibility compliance, as opposed to sort of an automated checker, which at least, some on the surface will give you some good feedback. But it's really important to address it in the conversations, I think, is the way Sabrina was describing it, for sure.
It's a big hole that some people are really, really, really educated in. We have a couple that are specialized in it, and we have a group that goes through, but it's not my deep hole. I'll say that.
Yeah. And then, part of it too is understanding your audience. If you know what, there's one thing to do accessibility in the name of compliance, right? This needs to meet this particular standard, but understanding what are the needs of my particular learning audience, and can we make sure we're addressing those specifically? And then it's less about making sure none of those flags pop up in that auto checker, but we've built this knowing that it's going to go to this audience, so it's part of the work that needs to be done up front for a lot of this stuff. But again, if it feels like there's extra work, it's really just that front end, getting it right at the beginning, which makes it so much easier moving forward.
I like how you said it's not all about the compliance, about the people. Make sure that you're engaging with the people that this is going to impact, and ask them how you want to how they want you to show up. We make a lot of assumptions, or here's what the industry is telling me. Go to your people and figure out how they want you to show up for them.
Absolutely. Simple learner feedback loops can identify issues that you didn't know existed. Could be language issue that you didn't know existed. I've seen that working with organizations on sort of their climate surveys and reading through the feedback, these open-ended questions, and it starts to pop up, not in a standard survey question, but like an open-ended response. If you start to look at the themes, you realize, hey, they want more stuff that's in, this language, or more suited for this location, this geography, things that they maybe weren't aware of. So, feedback from that communication with your partner is obviously important, and just as important is that feedback communication loop with the learners who are ultimately going to be the audience for this material.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think we managed to get through all of the questions and also the comments. I really appreciate everyone's participation. We love it, the participation in the polls, the questions, the feedback, the opinions, also really great. Sabrina, of course, thank you so much for really breaking down the really critical thought points through this process. I think it can be a little overwhelming when you look at it as a whole, but really thinking through it, these are the things to be aware of. I think that's really helpful for folks. And obviously also, thank you so much for sharing that checklist. That's in the link is in the chat. It's also in this deck. So if you haven't downloaded it already through the link in the chat, you'll get an email that will have it in there along with a link to the recording, but in the deck, that you get, that link will be live, an active link, so you can click it and get the checklist from there. Really helpful tool. So Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. I appreciate all the thoughtful feedback.
Yep, and again, of course, thanks to Lumious for the hour and putting this on for us, and we'll hopefully see you all in another webinar. So thank you, everyone.